What if the most beautiful narrative sold to humanity, the sacred promise of romantic love, was in fact the most effective psychological weapon ever deployed? There are truths whispered only in the shadows of philosophy. Truths that rarely surface because they threaten to utterly dismantle everything you have been conditioned to believe about connection, commitment, and destiny. These are the uncomfortable truths that do not offer comfort. They offer confrontation. They awaken the sleeping soul with a shock of clear, painful reality. And there is one primary truth that continues to shatter the emotional lives of millions of men who refuse to look away. Women do not love in the traditional, idealized, linear fashion. The foundational lie is not born of malice or cruelty. It is born of ignorance regarding the profound structural differences between the male and female emotional logic. While men willingly lose themselves in the fantasy of eternal, unconditional devotion, the feminine impulse operates from a deeper, more ancient, and far more practical logic. This is the illusion of symmetry. You are never prepared for this battlefield. From childhood, you were sold a comforting, toxic myth. The myth that love heals all, that sacrifice is always justified, and that by completely giving of yourself you are guaranteed to receive symmetry in return. You were told that persistence is romantic, that suffering for love is beautiful, and that unconditional surrender is the correct path. They forgot to tell you the most important part of the code. The type of idealized, unconditional, eternal love you chase is not the operating impulse that drives many women in their selection and attachment. Arthur Schopenhauer observed this brutal calculus with excruciating clarity. Writing without poetic flattery or the comfort of fairy tales, he diagnosed so-called romantic love as a massive illusion, a social and biological invention designed to distract the individual from the self. It anesthetizes the man with promises of completeness and fate, when in reality it is often merely a biological instinct cleverly masked as an elevated spiritual emotion. Schopenhauer's goal was never to cause pain, but to awaken. He pointed out that feminine desire, far from being cruel, adheres to ancient, cold, evolutionary requirements: security, stability, and propagation. These are deep, evolutionary forces, often entirely unconscious even to the woman experiencing them, operating under the ruthless laws of natural selection. If a man fails to understand this fundamental structural asymmetry, if he insists that men and women love identically, he is guaranteed to experience devastating disappointment, psychic exhaustion, and profound betrayal. Not because she intentionally wronged him, but because he demanded and expected a commitment and a constancy she was biologically and emotionally never programmed to give. Because you lacked this core piece of genosis, you gave your totality. You willingly sacrificed your attention, your vital life energy, your time, and your sacred vulnerability. You made the catastrophic error of believing that your unconditional investment would be rewarded with the same intensity and fidelity. And when that guaranteed reward failed to materialize, when she grew cold, when she emotionally withdrew, when she vanished without explanation, the pain was devastating. It was not merely the loss of her presence that broke you. It was the violent, absolute collapse of the entire dream structure that underpinned your personal conception of love. The monad suffered not the loss of a partner, but the loss of a foundational, accepted reality. This is the great void where the path to true self-sovereignty must begin. When the illusion finally shatters, the residue is not just agony, but crippling confusion. You believed you did everything right. You were attentive, loyal, devoted. You surrendered your all, believing this absolute surrender would be sufficient. Yet she still departed. You ask, what went wrong? But you were not wrong. You simply entered a game whose rules were never explained to you. You entered believing you were forging a partnership of souls, when you were in reality participating in an ancient, unconscious dynamic of nature. Schopenhauer spoke of this plainly. For the man, idealized love is an illusion that separates him from his own purpose, anchoring him to a fantasy that never truly belonged to him. From this clinical standpoint, what the man called eternal love was, from the female side, often a functional process, an effective biological mechanism, a strategy of selection, evaluation, and discarding, based on criteria of adaptation and resource security. While he believed he was building a sacred connection, she, even unconsciously, was reacting to far more ancient and pragmatic impulses. He dreamed of profound spiritual connection. She analyzed his capacity to provide emotional, material, and genetic security. This is not a judgment of her. It is a declaration of the structural difference. The failure was not hers. The failure was your ignorance regarding this structural asymmetry. You saw love as a sacred, static covenant. She perhaps unconsciously saw it as a moment-to-moment opportunity. You believed that unconditional surrender would ensure permanence, but her instinct operates as a radar, continuously assessing. Are you still the best option? When you cease to be the perceived best option, when another man appears to offer superior status, greater protection, more resources, or higher vital energy, the instinctive attraction simply vanishes. There is no major conflict, no explanation, no grand confrontation. It just disappears. What you perceived as an unshakable eternal bond for her might have been merely a cycle that reached its end, and you, having staked your entire identity on the fantasy of permanence, find yourself utterly destroyed, asking desperately, where did I miscalculate? But you didn't miscalculate. You simply entered the biological dynamic believing you were in a spiritual partnership. This is the stage where many men truly collapse. Some retreat into bitterness, becoming hardened and cynical. They cling to resentment, believing the only solution is to reject love or retreat entirely from women. But Schopenhauer never advocated for this retreat. He did not say to stop loving. He said to open your eyes and cease idealizing. To understand that the intensity of love you feel may not carry the same structural meaning for the object of your affection. Once you see this reality with ruthless clarity, there is no return. The veil is stripped away, and with it collapses the entire false history that held you in emotional servitude. When everything crumbles, when she departs, be it in body or soul, you are left without a foundation because your vulnerability was built on her foundation. You entered the relationship with an absolute faith that she was the only one. Not an episode, not a phase, but the final destination. The true internal rupture occurs when you realize your identity was unconsciously tethered to hers. Your purpose, your motivation, your emotional security all revolved around the false story you were co-writing. And when she walks away, you realize you no longer know who you are without that story. This is the true existential implosion. Your identity was destroyed not by betrayal, but by the unconscious choice to surrender your soul to something that only required utility, not eternity. You expected constancy from a system programmed by biological imperative to be fluid, temporal, and functional. You allowed your center to dissolve. Your dignity slipped through your fingers. You became the supplicant, begging for the return of a feeling that was biologically withdrawn. The more you compensated, the further she retreated because she stopped reacting to your pain and started reacting to your position. When that position became fragile, desperate, and dependent, her instinct could no longer find the security it required. Schopenhauer offered a mirror, not a weapon. The truth he reflected was not her image, but your image. Your profound need for idealization, your desperate thirst for acceptance, the self-imposed blindness you wore to avoid the pain of reality. The way out of this abyss is not found in new romantic attempts or in blind faith in happy endings. It is found in the truth. A truth that may burn, that may destroy the old illusions, but that will finally force you to see. The collapse you feel is not just the end of a relationship, it is an existential implosion. It shows you that idealization without gnosis is the most direct path to being lost in a story that was never truly yours. The Sovereignty Protocol demands that you now undertake the most difficult, most courageous act. The reclamation of the self. You must cease to idealize. You must stop seeking approval from someone who never saw you as an equal partner. You must finally return your gaze inward with the same intensity, the same devotion that you once gave to the external fantasy. This transformation requires courage. It requires looking in the mirror and confronting the truth that you allowed this to happen, not out of weakness, but out of ignorance. You gave everything without demanding balance. You adapted your life to her life. You stopped building your own path to walk alongside hers. You believed that love was synonymous with pain, that persistence was noble, and that retreat was failure. But the real cowardice is insisting on an illusion that corrodes your own essence. When you declare, "I allowed this," you are not condemning yourself. You are reclaiming control. You are achieving the ultimate freedom. The true emotional maturity begins when you realize that your inherent worth is non-negotiable and does not depend on being chosen, loved, or validated by anyone. You stop trading your sacred integrity for acceptance. And that is when something long forgotten returns. Your presence, your vitality, your integrity, your self-sourced manhood, pure and free from need. Love is not the enemy. The lie of unconditional, symmetrical love is the enemy. The final victory is the return to yourself. Now you know, and with this gnosis, it is impossible to go back to sleep. You cannot continue to pretend to believe in what is already shattered. You cannot betray yourself again for a promise that has already wounded you. The truth is not the weapon. The truth is the key. This is the turning point, the eye of the storm, the realization that the entire edifice of romantic pursuit, as prescribed by popular culture, is a psychological Trojan horse, designed to harvest the very essence of the masculine spirit. The man, anchored by his innate need for purpose and commitment, interprets the relational dynamic as a quest, where his worth is proven by the successful capture and permanent retention of the idealized feminine. This framing is the master stroke of the conditioning. It diverts his focus from his sacred architecture, his mission, his sovereignty, his inner world, and anchors it to an external, perpetually conditional source of validation. The man is not betrayed by an individual woman. He is betrayed by an entire societal narrative built upon a lie of equivalence. Consider the male and female wiring through the lens of Schopenhauerian will. The male will, in this context, drives towards singular focus, commitment to a long-term goal, and a desire for static, absolute fidelity as a reflection of his effort and success. The female will, however, is a manifestation of the species will. It is pragmatic, ruthlessly selective and optimized for the highest possible outcome for the next generation. It is a flowing river, not a fixed reservoir. This is why the male desire is often for the object of love, while the feminine desire is often for the outcome of love. The outcome is security, stability, genetic quality, and the resource-rich environment necessary for survival and propagation. When the man's output begins to degrade, when his focus shifts from his mission to his emotional neediness, when his position of strength weakens, the species' will in her registers this degradation as a threat to the desired outcome. The disillusionment is not a failure of character. It is a profound lesson in natural law. You believed your intention, your pure, unconditional love was the governing force. But the system is governed by instinct. Your surrender of self, which you viewed as the highest act of romantic virtue, was registered by the ancient, unconscious part of her as a severe risk. It signaled a man who lacked a defined internal center, a man whose stability was dependent on her presence. A dependent man, in the cold calculus of evolution, is a weakened asset. The very act of devotion you were taught to champion became the trigger for her emotional withdrawal. The paradox is devastating. The more you chased the idealized commitment, the more you eroded the very foundation of attraction and respect. Idealization is the primary mechanism of self-sabotage. It is the act of projecting an impossible, static perfection onto a dynamic, flawed human being. You were not in love with her. You were in love with the idea of her, the perfect counterpart, the missing piece that would finally complete your own fractured sense of self. This is the ultimate expression of immaturity, seeking to fill the void within through external attachment. Schopenhauer was clear. True freedom requires the recognition of the will's endless, meaningless striving and the subsequent detachment from it. In the context of love, this means detaching from the outcome of the desire itself. When you idealize, you create a monument to her perfection, and in doing so, you must inevitably bow down to it. You make her the gatekeeper of your worth. You are not building a partnership. You are building a religion of two, where she is the goddess and you are the supplicant. This positioning is inherently unstable. When a man worships a woman, he forfeits his own divine spark. He becomes passive, reactive, and subservient. The crucial gnosis here is understanding that the feminine response is not a conscious moral judgment, but an instinctual reaction to diminished status. When you idealize, you unconsciously elevate her status and lower your own. You signal that your life lacks meaning without her. The unconscious feminine mind interprets this imbalance not as endearing love, but as lack of sovereignty. A man without sovereignty is a man who cannot protect his territory, his resources, or his family. The instinctual imperative to select the strongest provider, the most stable resource base, is triggered, and the withdrawal begins. The pain you feel is the death of the idealized self you projected onto her. The true source of the agonizing betrayal is the realization that your sacred investment, your belief in eternal, unconditional love, was not merely unrewarded but actively penalized. This pain is the crucible. It forces you to confront the self-delusion. Why did I need her approval so desperately? Why did I allow my inner world to be dictated by her fluctuating affection? The answer is always the same: a failure to build a robust, self-sufficient inner kingdom. The true power is not found in controlling her affection, but in completely neutralizing your need for it. To exit the cycle of disappointment, you must first understand the true economics of emotional value. In the idealized narrative, value is measured by the depth of sacrifice and the purity of intention. In the real biological dynamic, value is measured by status, utility, and optionality. Status and utility. The value of a man is not his commitment to her, but his commitment to his mission, and the resultant status this mission provides. When a man prioritizes his purpose, he generates two things: internal integrity, a man who is centered and difficult to manipulate, and external resource, status accumulation. Both are highly attractive. When he shifts his focus from his purpose to her emotional needs, both diminish. He becomes a resource user of her emotional energy rather than a resource generator. Optionality. This is the unspoken currency. A man who is emotionally self-sufficient, who pursues his purpose regardless of the relationship status, subtly signals high optionality. He chooses to be with her, but he needs to be with his mission. A man who makes his partner his purpose signals zero optionality. He is completely tethered, and his value collapses. The paradox is that the feminine seeks commitment, but it must be commitment offered from a position of choice, not need. The lie you were sold is that vulnerability is a strength in this dynamic. But vulnerability, when it manifests as emotional neediness, is perceived not as intimacy, but as a resource drain. The world rewards strength, not supplicating weakness. Schopenhauer's analysis insists that the primary driver is the will to live, which translates into the instinct to secure the best possible future. Your inability to maintain emotional neutrality, to hold your own center against her emotional volatility, becomes a signal of your fragility. The path of the sovereign man is to operate from a position of radical indifference to the outcome of the relationship while maintaining absolute devotion to his mission. This indifference is not an act of cruelty. It is the natural byproduct of a life already full, a self already complete. It communicates that her presence is a profound addition to his life, but her absence is not a detraction from his core identity. This is the unshakable center. Without this center, you are merely a satellite orbiting her emotional gravity, and satellites are, by definition, secondary. The implosion was the necessary demolition of a false structure. Now begins the meticulous work of rebuilding the sacred architecture of the self. This is not about getting her back or even finding a new, better partner. It is about becoming the man who is structurally incapable of experiencing that level of psychic devastation again. The first step in this reclamation is the full acceptance of radical responsibility. You must stop blaming the external world, the system, or the individual woman. You must declare, I was ignorant of the rules of the game and therefore I lost. My failure was not one of morality, but of gnosis and execution. This declaration is the cornerstone of true power because it places the locus of control entirely back within your own being. When you own the failure, you own the solution. The sacred architecture is built on 3 pillars, which must be prioritized above all else, including any current or future romantic relationship. Mission. Your primary focus is the pursuit of your highest purpose, the creation of tangible value in the world. This is the source of your status, your resource, and your self-respect. It must be your primary relationship. All romantic relationships are secondary additions to this mission. Sovereignty. The absolute refusal to outsource your emotional state to any external source. Your happiness, your validation, and your sense of worth are generated entirely internally. This is the non-negotiable emotional boundary. You must become the self-contained emotional system. Integrity, the alignment between your stated values and your daily actions. This means no more supplicating, no more begging, no more accepting diminished terms out of fear of loss. It means having the courage to walk away from any dynamic that compromises your inherent dignity. The final and most brutal realization is that the male search for the one is often the search for a permanent witness to his worth, a static container for his volatile identity. The sovereign man understands that his worth is a constant, self-renewing resource, and that a partner is an appreciative companion on a journey he would take anyway. The emotional intensity you mistook for eternal love was merely the biological mechanism of pairing. Now that you are awake, your task is to sublimate that lower animalistic energy, that needy, dependent will, into the service of your higher purpose. The key is not to reject love, but to elevate your definition of it. True love, as experienced by the sovereign, is a dynamic exchange between two complete self-sourced individuals who choose to walk alongside each other, not two halves desperately seeking completion. The pain of the past was the price of admission to this higher level of consciousness. You paid the toll with your idealized dream. The reward is freedom. You are no longer driven by the biological will of the species. You are driven by the conscious will of the self. This is the end of the illusion. This is the beginning of the self. The wound is where the light enters. The wound is now your guide. Do not seek external closure. The only closure you need is the internal finalization of your new, non-negotiable truth. You have been initiated into the painful, magnificent genosis. The only path forward is the relentless, silent march toward your own singular destiny. You are now free to build a life so compelling, so focused on its own unfolding, that the question of external approval becomes utterly irrelevant. The former self has died. Welcome to the dawn of the sovereign.